By the time the wall was done, our little office looked like the inside of a detective's trailer in some true crime series. Every sheet of paper was pinned and color-coded. Red for fines, yellow for emails, blue for screenshots of Karen and her flashlight-happy deputy. Gary, thread-connected patterns that almost looked like battle maps. Pam stood back, arms folded. "If she wants a war, let her see what organization looks like," she said. I nodded, staring at the growing mosaic of madness and petty tyranny. I wasn't sure if we were building a defense or documenting history, but either way, it felt good. Every pin in that board was a line in the sand. The next morning, I did what any rational man staring down an HOA dictatorship would do. I brewed a pot of strong coffee, sat at my desk, and started digging. Pam handled the cameras, the emails, and social media chatter in our neighborhood app. She's surgical that way, precise, methodical. I handled land records and paperwork analysis. Between the two of us, Karen didn't stand a chance. By noon, I'd found an interesting thread buried in the Cedar Crest Meadows Development Archive. Line item for a planned walkway easement that stretched just past our cul-de-sac, but stopped exactly 50 feet short of my property line. It was supposed to terminate near a future access lot, but that project was never completed. Translation? There was no legal public path through my yard. Never had been. Things got stranger. The developer who originally submitted that easement ended up donating plots directly to the HOA, one of which happened to border the Wilson property. The dates overlapped with Karen's first election to the board. That was the moment the idea hit me. "She's not enforcing a rule," I told Pam. "She's protecting a bad deal. That public path excuse? It's cover for something tied to the developer." Pam tilted her head, thinking. "Like a kickback? Or favoritism? Either way, it's leverage. She's fought me this hard not because of my 4-foot gate, but because if my yard's not public, her map and her power starts to crumble." Pam's eyes narrowed in the best possible way. "Then we find proof." The next few days turned into a quiet operation of our own. Under the dim light of my workshop lamp, Pam combed through board minutes. Public record, thank you, Internet. I visited the county recorder's office under the pretense of verifying my deed. The clerk, a kind older woman who had probably seen every brand of HOA nonsense, didn't even look surprised when I explained. "Karen Wilson?" she asked. "She's been in here twice this year arguing about parcel boundaries she doesn't own." I leaned closer. "You don't say," she tapped her screen, squinting. "Looks like she tried filing something about community connectivity rights along the creek. Never approved. Missing signatures. Missing or forged?" I asked. Her eyebrows rose, but she didn't answer that one out loud. By Thursday night, we had the puzzle pieces. We just needed a way to put them together for everyone to see. Pam suggested the neighborhood Facebook group. "Half the community's fed up with her rules already," she said. I shook my head. "Too easy for her to delete posts and spin it? We need an old-fashioned reveal." "What kind?" "The HOA board meeting next week." Pam grinned like she might actually enjoy this more than I would. "Then let's give them a show." Saturday arrived, and like clockwork, Karen made her next move. Another fresh envelope on our doorstep. Violation, unauthorized political display. The display? A single flagpole mounted near our porch with a simple US flag. Pam looked at me from the kitchen table. "She's trying to bait you." "She might just succeed," I replied, tearing the notice neatly in half. But inside that envelope was something more useful. A copy of the supposed public easement map, stapled behind the fine notice. She'd just handed me her own evidence. That night, Pam scanned the document and laid it beside the legitimate county map we'd retrieved. The difference jumped off the page like neon paint. Her diagram showed a line cutting right through our property. The county's version stopped 3 houses earlier. Colors, signatures, everything mismatched. "She modified this," Pam said, disbelief threading her voice. "She added her own digital signature to make it look real." I nodded slowly. "And she's used that to enforce fines for 2 years. Pam looked at me. "You realize this could get her removed?" "I'm counting on it." The night of the HOA meeting felt more intense than any courtroom drama I'd ever seen. Folding chairs filled the community center basement. Karen stood up front, crisp blazer, fake smile, gavel in hand, Gary sitting loyally beside her. When she called for complaints, I raised my hand. The room quieted. "Mr. Jordan," she said, voice dripping with condescension. "Here again about your unauthorized gate?" "Yes," I said evenly. "And about something called Section 14, Sub-Easement C, Public Path Adjustment dated 3 years ago." Her smile thinned. I could almost hear teeth grinding underneath. I walked to the projector she used for her PowerPoints, nice little perk of being early, and connected Pam's laptop. The screen behind her flickered to life, displaying two overlapping maps, color-coded. "This," I said, "is the legitimate county easement record, publicly filed. And this," I clicked, showing her version, "is the document distributed by our HOA. I highlighted the difference. The red line of Karen's public path cutting right through our property. Murmurs filled the room. Gary adjusted his collar like he'd swallowed a bee. Karen tried to regain control. "That's clearly a misunderstanding." "No, it's not," Pam cut in from her seat. "Here's the filing record. That second map? Never submitted. The registry clerk confirmed it's missing authentication, meaning someone fabricated it." Gasps. Then silence. The projector light caught Karen's face. And for once, she had no words. The older residents, the ones who had been quietly fined for decorative wreaths and 5-minute trash violations, began whispering among themselves. Within minutes, the calls for an audit started. Karen slammed her gavel, but the sound didn't help. It just echoed in the unraveling silence of power slipping away. Within a week, the HOA board called an emergency meeting, without Karen. The new acting chair reversed nearly every fine she'd issued in the last year, citing irregularities in record-keeping. The term was polite. Ugly truths take time to surface politely. Karen resigned, for personal reasons. Gary was voted out the same day. As for the so-called public path, the county itself posted a new sign at the head of it. "Just before my yard fence, private property, no trespassing, by county order." That night, I sat by my gate with Buddy curled at my feet, beer in hand, listening to the creek. Pam joined me, smiling as the glow from our ring cam flickered softly. "Peace," she said softly. "It's nice," I agreed. "Until the next hurricane decides to move in," she laughed. "Then we'll lock the gate." I raised my bottle. "To wood, bolts, and the full HOA bylaw library." Pam clinked hers to mine. "And to the woman who runs her mouth no more." By morning, the neighborhood chat was in full gossip mode. Word spread fast that the public path was never public at all. My inbox filled with quiet thank yous, even from neighbors who'd been too afraid to speak up before. Buddy barked at the fence once, as if saying, "I told you so." And somewhere across the street, Karen's house sat dark and silent, her mailbox empty. For the first time in months, Cedar Crest Meadows felt like what we'd paid for, peaceful again. And this time, the only thing that creaked at night was my perfectly legal cedarwood gate, closing softly against the wind. She printed the relevant pages of the bylaws and highlighted the sections we were compliant with, and the sections they were ignoring. We pinned my certified mail receipts in a neat row. It started to look like one of those conspiracy boards you see in detective movies with strings of yarn connecting different pieces of evidence. It was our proof wall. Our neighbor Finley, a retired accountant with a love for gossip and a healthy distrust of authority, saw what was happening. He caught me one Saturday while I was edging the lawn, making sure it was exactly 3 in. "Of course. She's trying to squeeze you out, Kirk," he whispered, leaning over the hedge. "She did the same to the Millers a few years back over the color of their front door. Find them into the ground until they painted it. HOA approved tope." He shook his head. "She once tried to find me 4 unharmonious wind chimes." Finley became our eyes and ears, a source of intel from the neighborhood's old guard. Finley peered over the hedge. "Unharmonious wind chimes," he sniffed. "She said mine were in B-flat." I blinked. "Is B-flat illegal now?" "Only on Tuesdays," he said, dead serious. "Also, my porch mat was too welcoming." Pam leaned out the door. "We're logging this." Finley brightened. "Good, I bought a tape measure with lasers. If she steps 1 inch on your grass, I'm calling it an incursion." The fines kept piling up. The total on the wall was now over $500. The letters were getting nastier, using words like lien and foreclosure. It was stressful, but every time I looked at that wall, my resolve hardened. It wasn't just a collection of grievances. It was a testament to our fight. It was a promise that we would not be bullied. We were building a case. Peace by infuriating peace. One night, Pam was reviewing the day's security footage, a ritual she'd adopted. She suddenly went still. "Kirk," she said, her voice low and tight, "you need to see this. It's not just flashlights anymore." I walked over and looked at her screen, hovering just above our back fence. A small dark shape with 4 whirring propellers and a single glowing red light was staring right into our yard. The war had just gone airborne. Watching that little drone on the monitor felt like a profound violation. It was one thing for Karen to creep around on the sidewalk with a flashlight. It was another thing entirely for her to send a flying Camerado spy on us in our own backyard. The drone hovered for a full 2 minutes, its camera swiving, pointing directly at the gate, then panning across our patio before it zipped up and away, disappearing over the trees behind our house. My first instinct was primal. I wanted to run outside with a baseball bat, a garden hose, a fishing net, anything to knock that little pest out of the sky. I imagined the satisfying crunch it would make. I was furious. My hands were clenched into fists. Pam put a hand on my arm. She's always the calm one when I get heated. "Don't," she said softly. "That's what they want. If you break it, you're the one committing a crime, destruction of property. They'll call the cops on you, and this time they'll have a real reason." She was absolutely right. Lashing out would only make me look like the unreasonable aggressive one. It would play right into Karen's narrative. We couldn't beat Herbie playing her game. We had to be smarter. We had to use the rules, logic, and the law. The very things she waist-twisting for her own purposes. Our new strategy became simple. No illegal jamming. No physical confrontation. Just meticulous observation and documentation. Pam, my brilliant tech-savvy wife, immediately went into research mode. She replayed the security footage, zooming in and enhancing the image until she could identify the make model of the drone, a popular high-end consumer model. Then she spent the next hour becoming an expert on FAA regulations for unmanned aerial vehicles in residential areas. It turned out there were quite a few. Recording into our fenced yard violated state privacy laws. The drone's FAA registration and our city's nuisance ordinance made the case clean. The next evening, we were ready. We sat in the living room, pretending to watch TV, but our eyes were on the security feed on Pam's tablet. Sure enough, just after dusk, it appeared again. This time, Pam was prepared. She had her DSLR on a tripod by the back window, steady and time-stamped. As the drone hovered, she started snapping pictures. The shots were razor clear, and then she got the money shot. As the drone turned, the setting sun glinted off the side, and she got a perfect high-resolution image of the FAA registration number printed on its landing gear. It was a tiny string of letters and numbers, but it was as good as a license plate. I could have kissed her. While she was doing that, I was on my laptop with a flight tracking app that a pilot friend had told me about. I logged the drone's position, its altitude, and the exact time and duration of its flight over our property. We did this for 3 nights in a row. We built a perfect, undeniable record of every single incursion. On the 4th day, we acted. We didn't call Karen. We didn't send an angry letter to the HOA. We went official. We filed a police report and an FAA complaint, then sent a certified letter to the HOA board with both case numbers. The letter simply stated that we were being subjected to drone surveillance, that we had gathered evidence, and that we had filed official reports with the police and the FAA. We included the report numbers for her reference. It was a strategic masterstroke. We weren't accusing her directly. We were just informing her that we were taking the harassment seriously and creating a legal paper trail that led straight to her doorstep. The effect was immediate. The drone disappeared. It didn't come back the next night or the night after. The violation notices for trivial things kept arriving in the mail like clockwork, but the aerial surveillance stopped cold. We knew we had struck a nerve. We had shown her that we wouldn't be intimidated and that we knew how to fight back within the system. A few days later, our neighbor Finley appeared at our door with a plate of still warm snickerdoodles. He had a conspiratorial glint in his eye. "Heard you had a peeping tomat with propellers," he said, with a chuckle. He lowered his voice. "Just so you know, I saw Karen's boy Kyle down at the park last month, bragging to his friends about the fancy new drone his mom bought him. Said it could see a grasshopper from 400 feet. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It wasn't some random person. It was her son, almost certainly at her direction. On our proof wall, a new section was born. It held glossy prints of the drone, copies of the FAA complaint, the police report number, and my handwritten logs of its flight times. The wall was becoming a formidable beast, a detailed chronicle of a petty tyrant's campaign. We felt like we were gaining control, but we still didn't understand the most important part. Why this insane obsessive focus on our gate? It seemed like a ridiculous amount of effort for a simple shortcut. We wouldn't have the answer until one evening. Pam, who had been digging through public records online for weeks, let out a sudden, sharp gasp. "Kirk! Oh my God, Kirk, I found it," she said, ear yeas wide as she stared at her computer screen. "I know why she wants that gate gone. It's not about the kids. It was never about the kids." I walked over to Pam's desk and she pointed to her monitor. What I saw made the blood run cold in my veins. It wasn't just one document. It was a whole chain of them. She had started by looking up old HOA meeting minutes, which were public record, and noticed a vague reference to a creekside beautification project. That led her to the County Planning Commission's website, where she filed a public records request for any and all communications related to zoning variances near Cedar Crest Meadows. It had taken weeks for the request to be fulfilled, but the documents had finally arrived in her inbox that afternoon. The centerpiece of the files was a series of emails between Karen Wilson using her official HOA president email address and a man named Marcus Thorne, a vice president at a company called Creekview Developments. One HOA invoice literally read corridor assessment paid from HOA funds. The emails laid out a secret backroom deal in stunning detail. Creekview had purchased the large, undeveloped parcel of land on the other side of the creek from our neighborhood. Their plan was to build a resort of small, high-end eco cabins for wealthy tourists looking for a rustic getaway. A key part of their marketing plan, the thing that would justify the $1,000 a night price tag, was an exclusive private nature trail and direct creek access for their guests. To get that access, they needed a path from their new development to the existing trails on our side of the creek. They needed a bridge, and they needed a path leading to it. Pam clicked open a PDF attachment from one of the emails. It was a site plan, a professional architectural map. A thick red line designated a proposed pedestrian access corridor. That red line ran from a planned footbridge over the creek, through the HOA common area, and then straight down the side of a residential lot to the cul-de-sac. I leaned closer to the screen. My heart pounded in my chest. The lot the corridor cut through was ours. My side yard, the one with the new gate, was the linchpin for their entire multi-million-dollar development plan. The map was a deliberate fraud. It showed the corridor running through a public right-of-way. But Pam and I knew from our property survey when we bought the house that no such right-of-way existed. Our property line ran all the way to the creek bank. That land was ours. Karen Wilson had been promising this developer easy access, a clear path that she had no legal right to offer. She was trying to give away our land to seal her deal. What was she getting in return? The emails were coy, but they mentioned a handsome community improvement fund that the developer would provide to the HOA, a fund that she, as president, would control. They also mentioned a finder fee for her role in facilitating the project. She was selling us out for her own personal and financial gain. Suddenly, everything made a terrifying kind of sense. The obsession with the gate wasn't about Herson's shortcut. It was a business obstacle. The 911 call wasn't just teenage drama. It was a calculated attempt to have the police declare our yard a public path. The endless nitpicking fines were designed to harass us, to wear us down, to make our lives so miserable that we would either give up and remove the gate or sell the house to someone more compliant. The drone wasn't just spying on our patio. It was conducting surveillance for the developer, showing them the obstruction that needed to be removed. A feeling I had never experienced before washed over me. It was a calm, chilling rage. My usual sarcasm and wry humor evaporated, replaced by something harder, something colder. This woman wasn't just a power-tripping bully with a clipboard. She was a crook. She was actively engaged in a conspiracy to defraud us of our property rights. She's not just a bully, I said, my voice low. She's a criminal. Pam was already at the printer, her movements sharp and efficient. She printed every email, every attachment. She took the fraudulent map, laminated it, and pinned it squarely in the center of our proof wall. It was the heart of the conspiracy, the motive for every bit of harassment we had endured. Now we knew, but more importantly, Karen didn't know that we knew. We had the element of surprise. For the first time in months, we had the upper hand. We decided right then to keep this bombshell to ourselves. We would let her continue to think she was the one in control. We would let her make the next move, and we didn't have to wait long. Few days later, a new letter arrived from the HOA. It was printed on red paper. It was a final notice. It stated that if the unauthorized structure was not removed within 48 hours, the HOA would place a lien on our property and begin legal proceedings. The deadline was Saturday at midnight. I checked the weather forecast. A massive thunderstorm was predicted to roll in on Saturday evening. The kind of storm that knocks out the power where the roar of the wind and the crash of thunder can cover up all sorts of other sounds. It felt like the world was setting the stage for a final ugly confrontation. The storm arrived right on schedule, a full-blown tempest. The wind screamed like a banshee and rain hammered against the house in sheets. The lights had been flickering for an hour, threatening to give up at any moment. It was the kind of night that makes you want to lock the doors, curl up on the couch, and wait for morning. But Pam and I weren't relaxing. We were on high alert. The HOA's midnight deadline was approaching, and we knew Karen wasn't the type to let it pass without a fight. We had every camera we owned running. The Ring doorbell, the cameras on the corners of the house, and a new battery-powered trail cam that Pam had strategically hidden in a birdhouse aimed directly at the side gate. We were watching and waiting. 11:58 p.m. The wind howled. 12:07 a.m. The lights flickered. 12:11 a.m. Motion ping. I pulled up the live feed in my tablet. Two figures shrouded in dark hoodies moved through the driving rain toward the gate. Even in the grainy night vision footage, I could tell from their builds it was Kyle Wilson and one of his lanky friends. The friend was acting as a lookout while Kyle knelt by the gate. He pulled something from his backpack. It was long and metallic. The security light glinted off it for a second and my blood ran cold. Bolt cutters. Every rational thought flew out of my head. All the planning, the documentation, the strategy, it all vanished, replaced by a raw, protective instinct. These weren't just kids anymore. This wasn't a prank. They were on my property in the middle of a storm with tools actively trying to break in. "Pam, call 911. Tell them someone is breaking into our property right now," I said, my voice tight. "Body cams like clean audio," Pam said. "Hands visible. I've got the angles. I didn't grab anything. No bat, no flashlight. I wasn't looking for a fight. I just needed to stop them." I slipped out the back door into the raging storm. The wind and rain hit me like a physical blow. I rounded the corner of the house, my feet slipping on the wet grass. They hadn't heard me approach over the howl of the wind. They were focused on the gate, Kyle struggling to get the jaws of the cutters around the thick metal of the latch. "Get away from my gate," I yelled, my voice raw against the thunder. Kyle whipped around. "You can't out nature." "Cool," I said. "Then nature can buy the fines," his buddy whispered. "Dude, cops." "Smart choice." I coughed from the mud. "Attack the camera angle with the most pixels." They jumped like they'd been shot. Kyle spun around, his face a mask of panic and anger. He saw me, and without a second of hesitation, he lunged. He wasn't a big kid, but he had momentum. He shoved me hard in the chest. I'm in my 40s and in decent shape, but I was completely off balance on the slick ground. My feet went out from under me. I stumbled backward. My heel caught on a loose paving stone I'd been meaning to fix, and I went down hard. The back of my head hit the soft, muddy lawn with a dull thud. I wasn't knocked out, just dazed. The wind knocked out of me, mud and rain soaking through my shirt. It was in that exact moment of helpless confusion that the world exploded in flashing blue and red lights. Pam's call had been immediate, and a patrol car must have been just around the corner. The piercing wail of a siren cut through the storm's roar as the car screeched to a halt at the end of our driveway. The sight of the police car sent the two teens into a full-blown panic. Kyle dropped the bolt cutters with a clang, and they both took off, sprinting across the lawns and disappearing into the darkness between the houses. The car doors flew open, and I recognized the same two officers from the first 911 call. They ran toward me, their flashlights cutting beams through the rain. They saw me on the ground, muddy and disoriented. They saw the bolt cutters by the gate. Before I could speak, a new voice cut through the chaos. He attacked my son. It was Karen running out of her front door with a robe thrown haphazardly over her pajamas, her hair wild in the wind. Porch lights snapped on, phones rose. I saw the whole thing. Kirk Jordan assaulted my boy. My son was just trying to come home. It was a trap, a perfectly orchestrated diabolical trap. She had sent her son to do the dirty work, and she was waiting, ready to flip the script the moment the police arrived. The young, tense officer was looking at me with suspicion. "Sir, can you tell us what happened?" he asked, but his tone was accusatory. From his perspective, all he saw was me, a grown man on the ground, two teenagers running away in terror, and their mother screaming about an assault. It was my word against hers. In the middle of a storm, with the evidence scattered and my head still spinning, I felt a crushing wave of despair. This was it. This was how she was going to win, by framing me. This was my lowest point. I had followed every rule, played everything by the book, and here I was, the victim, being treated like the criminal. Just as the officer was helping me to my feet, my mind racing to find the words to defend myself. Pam stepped out onto the porch. She was holding her tablet, its screen glowing in the dark. The rain slicked her hair to her face, but her expression was one of absolute unwavering calm. Hearies, however, were blazing. "Officer," she said, her voice clear and strong, cutting through the wind and the rain and Karen's hysterics. "You need to see this, and so does she. We'll watch at half speed." Truth like slow-mo. She walked down the steps and turned the screen towards Karen. On it, a video was already playing. Karen's face, illuminated by the glow of the screen, went completely, utterly white. Because the video wasn't just from our camera. The first video Pam showed the officers was from our hidden trail cam. The battery backup had worked perfectly. The infrared footage was clear and undeniable. It showed Kyle and his friend creeping up to the gate. It showed the bolt cutters. It showed me coming out and yelling, not charging. And it showed from a perfect side angle, Kyle turning and shoving me. A clear, unprovoked act of aggression that sent me sprawling to the ground. Karen started sputtering immediately. That video is fake. It's been edited. My son was frightened. He was just defending himself. The older officer, the one with the weary eyes, just held up a hand to silence her. "Ma'am," he said patiently, "let's just watch." But Pam wasn't finished. She swiped the screen and a new video began to play. This one was from a completely different angle, higher up, looking down on the whole scene from across the street. "My neighbor, Mr. Finley, has a security camera in his upstairs office window," Pam explained calmly. "He saw the commotion and texted me the file a minute ago. He said his camera records everything." Finley's footage was devastating to Karen's story. From his vantage point, you could see the teens weren't just standing there. They were actively trying to break the lock. You could see that I had kept a safe distance before Kyle lunged at me. There was no ambiguity. Then came the final nail in the coffin. "There's one more," Pam said, her voice like ice. She swiped again. This video was shakier, clearly filmed on a cell phone from a window. Another neighbor was woken up by the shouting, Pam said. She was scared, but she filmed it. This third video had the best audio. You could hear my voice clear as a bell over the storm. "Get away from my gate." Then you could hear Kyle's voice full of teenage venom yell an expletive as he shoves me, followed by the thud of my fall. 3 different angles, 3 different sources, all telling the exact same story. It was a digital fortress of truth. In that moment, under the flashing police lights and the pouring rain, the entire power dynamic of our little cul-de-sac was rewritten. Karen Wilson's carefully constructed lie fell apart in less than 60 seconds. She stood there speechless, her mouth opening and closing like a fish as the evidence of her son's crimes played out on a tablet screen for everyone to see. He wasn't a victim. He was a vandal and an assailant, and she was his accomplice. The older officer looked at his young partner, then back at me. His expression was a mixture of apology and respect. "Go find those boys," he said to the younger cop. "Bring them back here." He then turned to me. I was still muddy, still a little dazed, but I was standing tall. "Mr. Jordan," he asked, his voice now formal. "Given this evidence, are you interested in pressing charges?" I looked past him directly at Karen. Her face was a twisted mask of pure, undiluted hatred. I thought about the months of letters, the fines, the creepy inspections, the drone, the developer deal. I thought about how she had tried to use the system to crush us. "Yes, officer," I said, my voice steady and clear. "I am for trespassing, criminal mischief, and assault." They brought Kyle and his friend back, both of them now sobbing and making pathetic excuses. The officers weren't having any of it. They cited both teens, and because of the assault and the use of the bolt cutters, it wasn't just a slap on the wrist. It was a matter for juvenile court. They took the bolt cutters as evidence. The older officer took a full detailed statement from me and Pam, and he copied all 3 video files onto a department laptop. HOA writes fines. Police write laws. As he was leaving, he gave me a wry smile. "Well, Mr. Jordan," he said, "looks like we've now had a practical lesson on how bolt cutters work, too." Karen herded her blubbering son back into their house, but not before she shot me one last look. It was a look that promised revenge. She had been publicly beaten. Her son was in legal trouble, and her lies were exposed. But she was still on the HOA board. The battle of the bolt cutters was over, and we had won. But I knew the war was far from finished. The next morning, as Pam and I sat at the kitchen table, sipping coffee and reviewing the events of the night, a new resolve settled over us. "She's cornered now," Pam said, looking at our proof wall. "She's going to use the full power of the board to retaliate. We can't just defend anymore. We have to go on the offensive. And I think I know a way to use their own ridiculous rules against them." Of all the petty, selectively enforced rules in the HOA handbook, Karen's favorite weapon was the one about nuisance noise. It was a masterpiece of vagueness, prohibiting any sound that could unreasonably disturb a neighbor's peace and quiet. There was a specific decibel limit mentioned in the fine print, 55 dB after 10 p.m., but in practice, the rule was whatever Karen decided it was. This was the bylaw she had used to find a family whose children were laughing excessively in their own pool, and Theone that had prompted the infamous warning to neighbor Finley for his unharmonious wind chimes. It was a tool of intimidation. Pam's plan was to turn that tool right back on its creator. Every Tuesday and Thursday night. Like clockwork, Pam said, pointing to the log book she kept of Karen's activities. She and Gary do their security patrol in his golf cart. Gary's golf cart was his pride and joy. It was an old beat-up thing that he had customized with a lift kit, oversized tires, and an engine that sounded like a lawnmower in a blender. It was, to put it mildly, not quiet. "I'll bet you anything," Pam said with a grin. "That thing breaks their own noise rule." The idea was so simple, so beautifully petty that I had to laugh. It was a sting operation, HOA style. The first step was acquiring the right equipment. I went online and ordered a professional-grade certified decel meter. It was the same model used by city code enforcement. It wasn't cheap, but I considered it a necessary investment in our ongoing legal defense fund. When it arrived, I spent an afternoon testing it, learning how to calibrate it and get accurate readings. We were going to do this by the book, with evidence that would be impossible to dismiss. That Tuesday night, we set our trap. At 9:45 p.m., we took our positions. Pam was stationed in the upstairs office, her camera with the zoom lens mounted on a tripod and focused on the street below. Her camera's display showed a timestamp, which was crucial. I was in the garage with the main door open just a crack, hiding in the shadows with the decibel meter. Our secret weapon was neighbor Finley. He had enthusiastically agreed to be our third-party witness. His role was to be taking out his recycling at the exact moment the patrol passed, filming the entire event on his phone from his driveway across the street. At 10:17 p.m., we heard it. The distinctive sputtering roar of Gary's golf cart echoed down the quiet street. They were making their slow pass, flashlights beaming into gardens and windows. As they approached our house, I held up the decibel meter, its screen glowing in the dark. The needle jumped. 60 dB, 65. As the cart chugged directly in front of our driveway with Karen sitting smugly in the passenger seat, the meter peaked at a whopping 72 dB. Gary revved like a blender. "Routine patrol," Pam called from the window. "Routine violation." Karen cupped her hands. "Prove it." I held up the meter. I did. Finley loudly to his phone. "This is Kirk live at Operation Loudcart. Today's forecast tickets. The rule says 55 dB after 1000 p.m. They hit 72. I filmed the reading on my phone as it happened. Pam captured a perfect video of the cart passing, and Finley's video from across the street provided the final corroborating angle. We had them dead to rights. The next morning, I drafted the most meticulously detailed, formally worded complaint the HOA had ever received. I used their own official nuisance noise complaint form. I described the incident, listed the date and time, and stated the recorded decel level. I attached a notarized affidavit swearing to the accuracy of my measurements. I included a link to Aprivit webpage, where I had uploaded all 3 time-stamped videos, shot from 3 different angles for the board's review. I filed the complaint against Gary as the operator of the vehicle and against Karen Wilson as the supervising HOA president on official patrol. I formally requested that the standard fine for a first-time noise violation, $100, be levied against each of them. And here was the master stroke. Instead of just sending it to Karen, I sent the entire complaint package via certified mail to the home address of every single member of the 5P-person HOA board. There was no way for her to intercept it or sweep it under the rug. Everyone was going to see it. The result was glorious. The board was forced to address the complaint at their next meeting. With the undeniable video and audio evidence, they had no choice. They had to find their own president guilty of violating the very rules she used to terrorize everyone else. They issued a formal violation notice and a fine to both Karen and Gary. It was a small amount of money, but the public humiliation was immense. The story ripped through the neighborhood. For the first time, people saw a crack in Karen's armor. She wasn't some untouchable queen. She was just a bully who had been caught being a hypocrite. You could feel the fear in the neighborhood begin to recede, replaced by a low murmur of defiance. We had proven she wasn't above the rules. We had made her look foolish. Riding high on this victory, Pam and I decided it was time to end this. Once and for all, we couldn't just keep playing defense and pulling off petty stings. We had to remove her from power. I found the clause we needed on page 12 of the bylaws. Any homeowner could call a special meeting of the entire association for any reason, provided they could gather petition signatures from 10% of the homeowners. Pam designed and printed a simple petition. The heading was clear: a special meeting to address abuses of power and to hold a vote of no confidence in the current HOA president. It was time for a town hall showdown. Gathering the signatures was like rolling a boulder downhill. The moment we started, it gained its own momentum. The story of the bolt cutters had shocked everyone. But the story of the decibel meter sting made them laugh. It showed them that Karen wasn't invincible. Neighbor Finley was the first to sign, his signature a triumphant flourish. Sarah, the young mother from down the street who had filmed the assault on her phone, signed next. She fined me $200 because my daughter's birthday balloons were non-compliant colors, she told me, her voice shaking with anger. It's about time someone stood up to her. One by one, our neighbors came to our door to sign. People we barely knew stopped us on the street. In less than 48 hours, we had signatures from nearly a third of the homes in Cedar Crest Meadows. We had more than enough. We formally submitted the petition, and the board was legally obligated to schedule the meeting. It was set for a Thursday night in the community clubhouse. When the night arrived, the room was packed. I had never seen more than 10 people at an HOA meeting before. Tonight, there were at least 100. The air was electric with anticipation and resentment. It felt less like a community meeting and more like a tribunal. Karen, Gary, and another one of her loyal board members sat at a table at the front of the room. They looked like they were facing a firing squad. Pam and I set up our laptop connected to a large projector screen. Karen tried to take control from the start, attempting to bog the meeting down in procedural nonsense. But I had memorized Robert's rules of order. I calmly and correctly countered her every move, forcing her to stick to the agenda that we had set. Karen snapped. Point of order. This entire slideshow is prejudicial. I smiled. Point of order sustained by the facts. Laughter rippled. She tried again. I moved to table. Out of order, I said, tapping the rules. You can't table the agenda you didn't set. The secretary coughed into the mic. He's correct. From the back, Finley Stage whispered. Objection sustained your gateness, and the room finally settled to listen. When it was my turn to speak, I walked to the front of the room. I wasn't angry or emotional. I was calm, factual, and prepared. I was just a homeowner telling my story. It started, I began, with a simple gate. I projected a photo of the gate onto the screen. Then I projected the exact bylaw that proved it was legal. Brick by brick, I built my case for the entire neighborhood to see. I showed them the digitized version of our proof wall, the endless stream of baseless violation notices, the invoices for thousands of dollars in bogus fines. I played the ring camera footage of Karen and Gary's creepy late-night inspections. The crowd murmured they had all been targets of similar tactics. I showed them the photos of the drone. I told them about the FAA complaints. Then I played the videos from the night of the storm. The entire room was silent as they watched Kyle Wilson approach my gate with bolt cutters. There were audible gasps when he shoved me to the ground. You could feel the mood in the room shift from discontent to outrage. Finally, I moved in for the kill. 4 months, I said, my voice ringing through the silent room. My wife and I couldn't understand why. Why this obsessive, relentless campaign against us over a simple gate? I clicked to the next slide. It was the developer map, the one with the red line labeled Pedestrian Access Corridor, cutting right through my property. This, I said, is why. It then projected the emails between Karen Wilson and Creek View Developments. I read aloud the parts, about the community improvement fund she would control and the finder's fee she was set to receive. The room exploded. People were on their feet shouting. Karen leaped up, her face pale with fury. That's a private discussion. It's confidential. It was preliminary. But it was too late. Everyone in that room understood. She'd abused her power, used their HOA dues to fund a campaign of harassment against a fellow homeowner, all in service of a secret, profitable side deal. She had betrayed them. I made 3 motions. The first to rescind and refund all fines levied against my family. It passed with a thunderous roar of aye. The second to formally censure Karen Wilson for abuse of power, conflict of interest, and conduct unbecoming of a board member. It passed with applause. They cited her for failing to control minors, kids, not coal miners. The third and final motion, a vote of no confidence to remove her as president, effective immediately. The secretary counted twice, 52 to 48. It passed. She was out, stripped of her power in a public forum in front of all the people she had bullied. She stood there for a moment, stunned, then grabbed her purse and stormed out of the clubhouse, her 2 remaining allies trailing behind her like pilot fish. We had won. A week after the town hall showdown, just as we were starting to breathe again, another official-looking envelope arrived. But this one wasn't from the HOA. It was from the city of Cedar Crest, Department of Planning and Development. My heart sank. Karen, in one final desperate act of spite, had filed a formal complaint with the city. escalating the fight to a new level. She was claiming my gate was an unpermitted public obstruction and a violation of city code. The letter informed us that as per city procedure, mandatory mediation was the first step. We were being summoned to City Hall. She had lost her power in the neighborhood, so now she was trying to use the power of the government against us. It was a clever, nasty move. The final battle wouldn't be in the clubhouse. It would be on neutral ground with a professional mediator who didn't know the history and who might just be swayed by Karen's practiced authoritative lies. The mediation was held in a small, soul-crushingly beige conference room at City Hall. The air smelled of stale coffee and bureaucracy. It was just me, Pam, Karen, and the mediator, a woman named Ms. Albright. She was in her late 50s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she had sat through thousands of these disputes and had zero patience for drama. Karen came in armed for battle. She lugged a massive 3-ring binder onto the table with a theatrical thud. She was dressed in a severe business suit, ready to play the part of a dedicated public servant. Ms. Albright started the meeting. "Ms. Wilson, since you filed the complaint, you can begin." Karen launched into a polished, well-rehearsed speech. She spoke of historic community pathways, the public's right to access natural resources, and the spirit of the Cedar Crest Master Plan. She presented old, blurry plat maps from the 70s that she claimed showed a trail where my yard now stood. She was trying to build a case for a prescriptive easement, a legal loophole where if a path has been used by the public openly and without challenge for years, it can legally become a public right-of-way. She painted me as a selfish newcomer, a greedy landowner trying to wall off a piece of the community for himself. She was good. I saw Miss Albright nodding thoughtfully, making notes. I felt a flicker of doubt. When it was my turn, I didn't touch the binder of documents Pam had prepared. I didn't need it yet. I just sat forward and spoke calmly and directly to Miss Albright. "Miss B. Albright," I started. "My wife and I purchased our home 3 years ago. As part of that purchase, we had a licensed surveyor conduct a full boundary survey." I slid a single folded document across the polished table. "This is a copy of that official survey. As you can see, our property line, as legally recorded with the county, extends all the way to the creek bed. There is no public easement of any kind noted on our deed." I let it sink in for a moment. The issue of so-called public access was never mentioned by anyone until the day after. I installed a simple gate to prevent ongoing trespassing, which included property damage and a near injury to our dog. I looked over at Karen, whose professional mask was beginning to slip. Her jaw was tight. I then addressed the heart of her complaint. "Ms. Wilson's formal complaint to the city," I continued, looking back at the mediator, "is that my gate is a public obstruction, that it blocks access." I paused, then reached down into the simple briefcase at my feet. I pulled out a small, heavy object and placed it on the table. It made a solid, definitive clack. It was a brand new, straight out of the box slide bolt latch, the exact same model that was on my gate. "This piece of hardware," I said, pointing to it, "proved so confusing and insurmountable for Ms. Wilson's teenage son that he felt the need to call 911 and report that he was being held captive." Karen sputtered, "Objection. That's irrelevant." Miss Albright simply raised an eyebrow and motioned for me to continue. She was intrigued. "An officer of the law," he went on, "had to come out to our home to provide a live demonstration on the use of this complex technology." I reached forward and slid the metal bolt on the latch into the closed position. Click. "This is locked," I said, making eye contact with Ms. Albright. Then I slid it back open. Clack. "And this is unlocked." I leaned back in my chair and delivered the final line, the one I had been waiting to use for months. I used the same deadpan, weary tone as the police officer from that very first day. "This," I said, letting the words hang in the air, "is how gates work." A tiny smile, quick as a flash, appeared at the corner of Ms. Albright's mouth. She got it. She understood everything. She saw the petty, vindictive core of the entire complaint. She realized this was not about public access. It was a personal vendetta being played out using city resources. She picked up the latch from the table. She held it in her hand, feeling its weight. She slid the bolt shut. Click. She slid it open. Clack. Then she placed it back on the table and looked squarely at Karen, her professional warmth completely gone, replaced by a firm, dismissive chill. "M. Wilson," she said, her voice final. "Agate is not a wall. A simple unlocked latch is not a public obstruction. Your complaint has no merit." The mediation was over. Karen's last desperate gambit had failed. She had tried to trap me in the city's bureaucracy, but I had used a $2 piece of hardware and a single simple sentence to demolish her entire case. She sat there utterly defeated as Ms. Albright officially dismissed the complaint. The war was finally truly over. We had won. Now all that was left was to go home and try to live in the peace we had fought so hard to secure. The aftermath of the mediation felt like the quiet after a long storm. The new HOA board, led by David, calm and reasonable, moved fast. First meeting, they adopted the town hall motions in full. A week later, a check hit our mailbox. Every bogus fine, refunded. "It felt like a small trophy you can cash," David asked me to help write a clean rule so this couldn't happen again. Pam and I spent a weekend at the kitchen table, coffee rings around drafts. We called it the Respect the Gate policy. Clear rights to fences and gates that meet code, proof required before fines, and a warning period baked in. Fewer power trips, more receipts. Karen Wilson turned into a ghost. She'd slide into her SUV without eye contact. Her title was gone. The clipboard had no bite. The last legal piece was her son's case. We didn't want a teenager's life wrecked, just a hard stop to the nonsense. Kyle pled down to mischief. In return, a judge signed a 5FT stayback order on both of them. Our line in the sand, printed and stamped. 3 weeks later, a Pharrell sign sprouted on Karen's lawn. The neighborhood breathed again like a held breath finally exhaled. Little repairs began. People waved longer. Conversations lasted past the mailbox. One evening, Pam was clipping her roses when Sarah, the neighbor who filmed the storm, walked up, shy. "Thank you," she said. "Karen, find me for my girl's sidewalk chalk. I paid it. I was tired." Pam handed her a paper sack of cherry tomatoes from our vines. "Next time," Pam said, "knock. We'll fight it together." A bridge rebuilt with produce. Finley became a regular stop. Muffins, gossip, and the grin of a man who watched a tyrant trip over her own rulebook. "Heard the buyers have 3 teenage boys and a dirt bike," he said, leaning on the fence. I laughed. "Tell them nature's great, the gate's greater." Weeks passed. The sold banner went up across the street. On a warm Saturday, I oiled the hinge on the gate while the creak made that easy gurgling sound that lowers your shoulders an inch. Peace felt heavier now, like something earned. Pam came out with 2 iced teas, beads off water running down the glasses. She rested on the post and watched me work. "After all that stress, letters, the proof wall, it's still just a gate," she said. I wiped the rag across the latch and looked at the wood we fought for. It wasn't just boards and screws anymore. It was stubbornness documented. It was a line drawn with maps and nerve. I slid the bolt, solid, low thunk, and slid it back. "Yeah," I said, finally smiling without weight. "But it's our gate." We tapped glasses. The clink sounded louder than it should in a quiet yard. Somewhere a mower started 2 streets over. Buddy thumped his tail in the grass. Pam knelt at the post and pressed basil starts into the soil. I ran a last drop of oil along the latch. Click. Peace.